Hello to another episode of Making Better Strategy. In case it's the first time you're here, so Better Strategy is a series of LinkedIn Lives, webinars, interviews, book reviews, and podcasts helping CEOs to make better strategy using fresh approaches. In case you don't know me yet, my name is Mark Snoekers. I've been a strategy advisor for some 20 plus years now, actually working with executives, CEOs, executive teams on making better strategy. And if you'd like to learn more about that, feel free to check out my website. And today I have with me here Alex Brueckman. Welcome, Alex, who's going to talk about his book, or we are going to talk about his book, The Strategy Legacy.
Good morning from Vancouver. I'm doing well. Thank you very much, Mark. Great to chat with you today.
Great. So I'm just going to put up here, where is it, your book, so that people can actually see it. I see you have it in the background. So here is Alex's new book, The Strategy Legacy. I think it only came out last week, if I...
6 days ago, exactly.
6 days
yeah.
ago. I got it. I actually downloaded it, got it on my Kindle. Haven't read everything yet, but the first part. I've read the first part. So, Alex, let's talk about your book and strategy and your approach to strategy. So let's maybe start with something a little easy, like what is your definition of strategy? I know that's always a big thing.
Oh, well, so I've been basically doing the same work as you've been doing in your introduction, and I've seen so many different definitions of strategy that it's sometimes hard to get your head around it. So it's the first thing that we actually do when we start working with our customers. We start to talk about what strategy means for them in their context. And that is often more relevant than what I think strategy is, because it's the starting point where the executive teams are. But in the end, I try to help them to reach a point where we understand strategy in a very Roger Martin-like style, if you want. Understand strategy as choices that you need to make today that will help you be where the market will be at some point in the future, so that you win in that chosen marketplace and can wow your customers.
Okay. Now, in the book, you talk a lot about this idea of organizational identity. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that and also make the link to, why strategy and why this idea of organizational identity?
I think everyone who has ever been part of some sort of a strategy process knows that strategy is not something that happens in an academic bubble. The moment you start conversations with executives about strategy and about theory, they roll their eyes because they know exactly that that's never going to work. So they have a reality in which they operate in. And that reality consists of human beings that they need to bring along. And the whole connection between how do I lead change, how do I build culture, and how do I use strategy as a vehicle for high performance is something that you cannot separate from each other. We cannot have conversations about business strategy without also talking about the people who will do the work afterwards. And that means everyone, individual contributors and leaders. The biggest strategy failures that I've seen in my life have not been because the strategy was a bad thing. It was because organizations failed to cascade strategy throughout the organization in ways that everyone understood what their approach and their contribution to bringing that strategy to life eventually needs to be. And when that happens on an individual contributor level, that's bad, because then everyone is like, yeah, strategy is for up them in the ivory tower, and it's not for me, and I don't know what they're doing, and I have no idea how my job is actually contributing. And the worst thing that can happen, or when that happens, we already know that the worst thing already happened. It's that the leaders in the organization were like, yeah, whatever, I'm still going to do what I did over the past years. They don't care about strategies very often. And this happens mostly when strategy is jargon heavy, when they don't understand it. And this is often the case when, let's say, organizations hire externals like consultants that give them a 500-page PowerPoint deck and call it the new strategy. this stuff is so heavy with jargon, and no one really knows what it means. And then leaders are supposed to implement something that they haven't understood in the first place and that they own in the first place, because they sort of outsource the responsibility for designing that strategy. That's in a nutshell the reason why we need to understand strategy as a vehicle to design more than just the strategy as such. We need to use it as a vehicle to look left and right and understand, are we using this strategy to turn our purpose into impact? Are we using this strategy in ways that it is in line with our values? Are we leading by those values? Which capabilities do our leaders and our individual contributors now need to actually implement that strategy? Because every good strategy comes with a set of transformation, with a set of changes. If you already knew how to do all these things, you would have done them already. The reason why you haven't done those is because you don't know how to do them. And that's capabilities that you need. So, and that's just a few of those 9 elements, Mark.
Okay. So if I understood you correctly, I mean, on the one hand, you say strategy, it needs obviously to take the larger picture into account, the values, your culture, capabilities you have. But at the same time, it's also about developing all these things moving forward.
100%.
Yeah, I'm very aligned with you on the done for you consultants. I think it's a little bit of a paradox that on the one hand we say that strategy is so crucial to the success of the organization, but then you go outsource that to somebody else. We learned in business school that you only outsource stuff that is not so relevant and not so important or not so crucial to your business. Right?
I would actually say you can outsource strategy, but you need to have understood it first. So you can't outsource the design of the strategy. You can outsource elements of your strategy. For example, I'm not at all advocating against using consulting companies, not at all. But I am advocating against giving them the keys to the castle. So you always need to be in the driver's seat as the executive team. You are the ones calling the shots and designing the strategy. But then you will run into difficulties. You will be like, we don't have enough manpower to do this analysis, for example. Outsource the analysis. That's totally fine. Right. Or anything that is part of the strategy process. Consulting is amazing because they can bring in knowledge and resources on a short term. And that's what you should make use of as an executive team, but never give them the responsibility to drive the process.
Yeah, right. So we are aligned there. So it's really about not outsourcing the whole thing, but CEOs or leaders should own the process. They should own the decision making, and then if they need specific pieces of work where they need external input, where they need market research or financial analysis, and they can't do that on their own, then yes, obviously they should try to get that. Now, another thing that in the book, I mean, you have this, you call it the 9 elements of organizational identity, right? Which is kind of your core framework, I would say, to define the whole thing. Now, and maybe if I may challenge you a little bit, you talk a little bit about vision, mission, impact, values, goals, target, management system capabilities, and strategy as part of this framework. Now, some people might say, well, okay, vision, mission, management system capabilities, targets, all these things, that's already strategy. So why call it organizational identity instead of calling it strategy and have strategy as a part of that organizational identity? Maybe you can just elaborate a little bit on that.
I'm 100% with you. You could call all that a strategy. But the point is, the moment we call one thing everything is the moment we dilute it and the moment we water it down. And one of the main reasons I wrote the book is because I wanted to give people that do not have a strategy background, like most of the executives I work with have no business background whatsoever. They have grown through their disciplines. They might be, I don't know, biologists or mathematicians, or have studied, English literature, and they might have had some exposure to strategy through an MBA or something like that. But that doesn't necessarily mean they know how to do that stuff. Yeah. To put it very bluntly. And I wrote this book mainly because I wanted to give people that need to understand strategy some sort of a glossary and some sort of a model and some sort of a framework and process to make it actionable. So this is not a strategic this is not a theoretic framework that I introduce. It's a very practical, how do I actually do strategy book? And to do that, we need to talk the same language. We need to use the terminology in an aligned way. And that's why I kind of playfully introduce in the very beginning of the book some sort of a glossary that we actually understand each other.
Yeah, I'm very aligned with you there on the need to agree on the framework and agree on what are we talking about, right? And I don't care too much about what framework it is. If I work with my clients, it's more a matter of making sure that all the important things are kind of covered. But then, it's really about aligning on this is what we do, and this is actually, if we say strategy, this is what we actually talking about, and
100%.
This is questions that we're going to ask ourselves and the answers that we are looking for. So if you added this kind of a new terminology, we might say, or a new framework at least, how do you prepare the clients you work with for that new framework? Do you require them to read the book, or how do you go about that practically?
Well, some of them actually have read very early versions of the book. So I've been sharing my thinking and the model and the process in some form or shape over the past 10 years already. But it's never been put together in a concise way. So the book only has 190 pages. It's a really quick read. And if you want to start a strategy process, as an executive, you know already that this is a marathon. This is nothing that's being done in a few days or weeks. This is like deep, heavy lifting. This is stuff that matters and that takes time. If you want to read a book that takes about 4 to 6 hours to read, depending on how fast you read, as a preparation for that, I think that's a very good investment. Do I require them to read it? Of course not. We can also have a conversation about it, and I quickly realize where they're at and can help them get their head around some sort of a framework, some sort of a concept. And it's more important to understand the bigger implications of starting a strategy process for an executive team, for the organization as a whole, than reading my book, for example.
But again, you have a conversation on it to align on this
100%.
How it works.
Yeah.
Something else that kind of I found very interesting, I'm curious about is, very often when we talk about strategy, we talk about the purpose of strategy being winning, value creation, financials at the end of the day, right? And you talk a lot about things like making an impact, making work meaningful, and then having all the alignment and the focus and the common direction on this bigger purpose, I might say, or you call it vision and mission. So what make you kind of, how should I say? You make it very clear that the ambition of strategy should be around purpose more than the winning and the value creation and the financials. How do you came about that?
I think it's a definition of what winning really means in life. And let's be honest, our work might be something really important, and we might use it to define our own individual identity to a large degree. And especially when I work almost exclusively with executive teams. And these are people that have accomplished tremendous success already in their life. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the C-suite. And for them, the conversation often shifts, especially in my one-on-one executive coaching sessions with them. The conversation is never about profit or growth or things like that. The conversations always shift toward meaning in life and to impact and to legacy, leaving a legacy. And very often they don't talk about legacy in the sense of their individual legacy as human beings. They talk about the impact that they can have by leveraging their organization in the best possible way to leave a legacy as an organization and as a leader in that organization. And that's why I introduced the strategy. The strategy legacy in the very beginning introduces a concept called the legacy trident. And that is really about understanding the massive impact that I, as an executive, have if I play my cards in the right way. Impact in the sense that I have tremendous reach and leverage as an executive within my organization. I can influence the leaders around me. I can influence the entire organization to think and to approach life in different ways, not only work, but why do we actually do every day what we do? We don't do it because we are good employees. We do it because we need to put food on the table for our families. That's the reason we work. Let's be very honest. We need to make money to pay for education, for housing, and for food. That's as simple as it gets. And if we understand that, and if we don't remove ourselves from those realities as executives, we understand that the way we show up, the way we treat people matters way more than helping them be successful in their jobs. And people will be attracted to leaders that help them achieve their individual goals. And I can only do that as a leader if I deeply care about human beings. So if I show up in that way, I build culture in an organization. And if I then take that little strategy piece and add that to the mix, not only do I create a people-centric culture, I create a people-centric performance culture, because all of a sudden everyone knows why I am showing up the way I show up, because I want to create an organization that is able to help my employees thrive, to make an impact in the wider industry, and maybe even do something that the world urgently needs. And if we show up in that way, we have addressed individuals in the business, we have addressed the business as a whole, and we have addressed society. And that's the legacy trident that I introduce, and that deeply resonates with the people that I talk about it, because once you are in the beginning in the early stages of your career, it's about making progress, it's about climbing the ladder, it's about finding the passion in what you do. But once you are in the C-suite, you already have 20 years under your belt, most likely. And the meaning and the reason why you show up every morning at work, it's a slightly different one then.
That's an interesting one, man. I have some clients who kind of have that thinking, but I also have to say that many, they come with very specific problems that are more related to growth, competition, profitability. So it tends to be a little bit more on that side, I would say.
I have both. It depends heavily on who you talk to. For example, the high growth startups that I work with, the Inc. 5000 companies, these are typically led by younger leaders. And there it's more about growth, about pioneering, about becoming relevant in an industry through being the first one and through blazing a trail to something that has never been done before. The C-suite executives of the Fortune 50 or Fortune 500 companies I work with, the relevance for those businesses comes from stability. It doesn't come from, blazing a new trail. And it's very different kinds of executives that we find in high growth startups, or it doesn't necessarily have to be startups. Those companies are partly 10 years old. But if you take a look at high growth executives and a look at Fortune 50 executives, these are very different kinds of people. They think extremely different. And what their job is and why they are hired or why they lead an organization is also very, very different from each other.
Yeah. And then I guess it's also a matter of organizational culture. I remember that we worked with a bunch of, so it's standalone companies that are part of the group, and they wanted to work on purpose and these things. So we did that and then presented it to the board, and the board said, I don't care about your purpose, show me the money, right? So it was kind of like more that focus that they were interested in.
An interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, different conversation to have. So in that sense, I mean, I approach my work really, so I think about strategy as a response to the challenges that keep you from reaching your ambitions, right? If your ambition is more around purpose or longer term or whatever, that's fine. But if your purpose is more, or your ambition is more around, I need to grow in North America, then we focus on that, right? So to have a pragmatic approach to dealing with that. And then very often, so there is a mix, again, I would say, about more shorter term strategic moves and priorities that move the needle, and then having more the longer term or the deeper conversations that you talk about legacy and how to build using strategy to build that organizational, what you call organizational identity, kind of follows once the crisis is over, let's say, or once the first steps have been.
That is a very interesting point that you make, Mark. A lot of organizations, they start to think about strategy when the platform is starting to burn, when they have some sort of a problem. And that's just, it's too late. I'm sorry. Then we're not talking about strategy anymore. Then we're talking about crisis mode. And then we talk about restructuring. And then we talk about, extinguishing the fire on the platform. That's not strategy. That's crisis management. And I mean, in the best case, you get the company in calmer waters, and then you can think about the future again. And for example, your example, wonderful example. How do I enter the American market? That's a tactical move. That's not necessarily a strategic move. The question is, why do you want to do that? And what is it that you hope to thereby achieve with your clients? That is the underlying question for strategy. If I do things just because they make sense, then this is kind of a business continuity plan. It's an operational excellence plan, or whatever you want to call it. It's not necessarily a strategic way of approaching a business. And I think one of the worst things that companies often do is to confuse these plans and what a strategy is. They need each other. Plans and strategy need each other, but they are definitely not the same.
Yeah, I guess, there's also different levels of strategy. And again, you need to be careful. Are we talking about more of a corporate level strategy where then the decision to enter a specific business or market is a strategic decision, and then business level strategy becomes more maybe about how to do that. But talking about crisis, we have a question from Tom McDewitt in Washington about a crisis. So how could you expertise in strategy development, or how could your framework also be applied in crisis management situations, and how would you advise for foreign policy experts dealing with security crisis like in Israel at the moment? Would you say that it's an interesting thing? I had another comment on LinkedIn the other day where somebody said that we were talking about good strategy, bad strategy, Rummel's book, and the comment was that, well, I don't like that. Somebody said, I don't like that he refers so much to military strategy. And my response was kind of, but if we want to have a generic definition of strategy, it should work in all different kind of scenarios. So would you say that your approach would work in dealing with a foreign policy / security crisis kind of thing?
Let me put this into context. A very smart person once told me, Alex, don't talk about things you don't understand. So first of all, I don't talk about politics. That's one of the big imperatives in my life. Now, having said that, if you understand strategy, if you want to understand strategy, you need to understand the origins of strategy. And the origins of strategy are military. This is the first, let's say, the first time human beings developed something that you could call a strategy. And if you bring it back to what we talked about in the very beginning, strategy is a set of choices that you make to win. And that is very applicable in a military context. And if you take it further, you can ask yourself, not only in a military or in a foreign crisis or in a business context, but also in your very personal individual life, you need to ask yourself, if you are not happy with the status quo, like how your world looks like today, how your individual world looks like today, you can use strategic frameworks to get yourself out of that situation. You can use them to define the desired future. And then if you establish that gap between where you are now and where you want to be in the future, then you develop a plan that moves you from that moment to the next.
And I would add to that, Alex. So for me, it's not just the plan from A to B, but if there is no challenge, I think you don't need a strategy. Then
100%.
A simple plan is enough, right? But if there is a challenge, then you need to think about some kind of constraint or something that makes it difficult. Then you need the strategy.
100%. And that is applicable in every situation: military, business, policy, and in your personal life or in the community that you are active in.
So do you want to give some advice on how to deal with foreign policy, or you stay clear of that, you say?
I definitely stay clear of that.
Okay, good. So Tom, if you want to have a discussion, maybe reach out through a direct message and then we can discuss that. We have two questions kind of similar way, whether you offer some seminars, workshops, or whether there is something online if somebody doesn't want to read the book to learn about the strategy legacy.
Yes, I do have an online course. It's called it's a strategy masterclass. So it's something that you do on your own, in your own time, in your spare time, and it's a step-by-step process that I guide you through. It's video based, so it's also uses a lot of different types of media, and there's a workbook coming with it, etc., etc. And that process guides you through a strategy creation process, if you want.
Okay, cool. So this is the masterclass, right? So I'm just going to
exactly that's available on my website.
I'm going to put the link into the chat. So Montasar, maybe that's something you can check out. Then we had another question here from Alessandro about whether you could give some examples of the executives that have mastered this legacy trident that you talked about. So do you have any specific companies? And I know that you talk about some in the book that you would recommend kind of looking into to learn more about practically how you do that.
Yeah. I do work with a number of organizations at any given moment. And I do come across people that leaders, executives that have more or less mastered the trident. I have actually never really met a human being, an executive that can completely disconnect their way of thinking from their corporate reality. And I think that's totally clear. And very often when we talk about strategy, we talk, as you already mentioned, Mark, we talk about certain constraints. But I have found that the executives that I enjoy working with the most are the ones that are not so extremely serious about what they do. They have understood that they are just there for a certain period of time, and the only thing they can do is enjoy the ride and do the best they can. And I think this enjoying the ride piece, a lot of executives, they just lose that at some point in their career. They become so driven by numbers, they become so driven by boards, they become so driven. Rather than drive themselves, they become driven. And I believe if you want to master the trident, this, if you want to call it a secret, the secret to that is to always listen to your inner voice. Do I still enjoy what I do? The moment you realize that you have stopped enjoying the journey, let's say some time ago, then it's really important to let's say investigate what it is that you need to put the fire back into your work life. Once we make decisions that, like work decisions, everyday decisions that make us feel uncomfortable, this is a good indicator that you might have lost the connection between who you are as a human being and what you aspire to do with what you have to do at work. So that's what I would call a culture disconnect. When your values are constantly under pressure and you move them aside to comply with what your organization expects from you or what the board expects from you. So when there is a value disconnect over a longer period of time, it will wear you down as a human being or as a leader, probably even both. And the reason is the following. If you show up at work every day as an executive and you defend the values of the organization, but they don't connect with your personal values, the way you show up is not authentic. People will realize that something is off. They might not necessarily be able to point towards it specifically, but it will wear you down internally. If you turn it the other way around, if you talk about your values consistently as an executive, and then the organization requires you to make permanently decisions against those values, then people will realize that what you talk about and what you do are two different things. And that will undermine your authority as a leader very, very quickly. So both of those scenarios show you that you need to create an environment in which you can show up as an authentic human being as a leader. And I believe that this is one of the it's a supercharger to create that strategy trident if you work in an environment that allows you or permits you to be your true self.
So I think in the book you talk about Patagonia as one example of somebody or an organization that has mastered this legacy trident.
Yeah, if you take a look at Yvon Chouinard, the founder and longtime leader of Patagonia, who has last year decided to basically give his company away.
Yeah.
I have never met him personally, but I've been following his way, I think, for probably the last 20 years. He has built something extremely extraordinary, and we don't find a lot of people who have that reach beyond their organization. And it's, especially when we talk about founders and executives, there are people that are extremely present in everyday media, like Elon Musk, for example, but for different reasons. Yvon Chouinard was never that present in the media, but when he was present, it was because he did something, or he said something that was controversial and not common business sense. Chouinard was always looking for ways to reduce the negative impact of running a business on the planet, for example. And in that process, Patagonia decided to do things that are counterintuitive for many organizations, but they help them to build a legacy way beyond their apparel and their climbing gear that they produce. And especially Chouinard as a leader, when he decided to hand over his shares to the Steadfast Collective and the Patagonia Purpose Trust, he did something that is totally counterintuitive. He gave his business away, literally. He doesn't own it anymore.
Yeah.
And he did it simply because he wanted to make sure that the company, even when he's not there anymore, I mean, he's not the youngest anymore. At some point in time, he will transition into a different form of being, I guess, like we all do. And he wanted to make sure that the company does not become a ping pong ball of capitalist interest. He always had a very interesting stance on capitalism. And what he basically did is he made sure that all the profits that Patagonia makes, that they don't reinvest, will go to environmental protection. This is massive. I mean, this is not just the 1% pledge they've been part of for decades. This is like literally using all the money that you make to protect undeveloped land from becoming developed and, being lost potentially forever. And this is a legacy that goes way beyond just, Patagonia as a company.
Yeah. So yes, Patagonia is a very, very good example there. Let's maybe talk about, there's a question that goes also in that direction. So we talked about the framework and some aspects of that. How do you go about doing strategy? So what are the kind of the process, the activities that that you go about, and that kind of touches on Sachi's question also about how to find the right insights to come up with a winning strategy?
I would say the way I do strategy with my clients is it's very, very practical. It has nothing to do with academic frameworks in itself. It is really about, okay, where are we? What's the starting point? And that starting point is extremely difficult or different for every situation. Every business has their own reality. Some of them have done strategy processes in the past. Some of them have realized that they kind of approach the end of a current strategy cycle and they need something new. For other companies, it's the first time they really think about strategy and leadership in that holistic way. It always depends on the maturity level of a business, the size of a business, etc. I've done processes with organizations that took 1.5 years because, 120,000 employees, 5 continents, huge businesses. And I've done those same processes in one way or another with smaller businesses within a couple of months. The process is always the same that I guide my clients through. It's about understanding where we're at, what the issue is that we have, what is the problem that we see. And then we need to understand, based on the problem, whether it's actually a problem worth solving, or whether we just accept that we do have a problem, but we don't care about it anymore because we will create an organization that plays in a different market, that answers different questions, that caters to different clients. So we're the first thing is we need to understand what strategy is and what it helps us to do. And then we define certain elements in that strategy. For example, very practically, when I use the term vision, for example, I'm not talking about a fancy marketing claim that you plaster across your website. I talk about like literally writing down, verbalizing what your business would look like if you could time travel. So for example, if you run an organization that I don't know, makes 10, 20 million in turnover this year, and you realize we've been kind of turning our wheels like crazy, but we're not moving anymore. We're not growing anymore. Why is that? Then I would come in and would ask you, okay, first of all, why do you want to grow? Can you answer that question? And if that's a a valid point from your perspective, okay, how do we then do that? And we write down, if you say, I want to grow to 50 million. Okay, more than that, please. That's just a number. Why is that number important? And we really dig into that and help executives understand the rationale that they have in their heads often, but that they are not able to properly articulate. And if they're not properly able to articulate it, then it's impossible to take the wider organization with you. We need to bring that onto paper. It's the starting point for a narrative that we create to bring the organization along. And that's probably the difference between how I approach strategy work and how many others do it. I approach it from the perspective of, at the end, we need to communicate that strategy. We need to be able to communicate it. And that's always my mantra, whether it's toward a board of directors, whether it's to the next leadership level, whether it's to 100,000 people in your business. In the end, and that's probably because my background is in journalism, I think in stories. I think in how can I tell that story in a way that it engages people. And if you are not able to tell a compelling story about the future of your business and how you will reach it through your strategy, then people will be like, yeah, I don't really get it. And then they will just not buy into it. It's that simple.
Yeah, we are very, very aligned there. Yeah, I think so. I tend to think about on a high level of abstraction, it's always about understanding what's going on. So having that kind of diagnosis of the problems or the challenges or the opportunities that are in front of you. And then it's about designing the strategy or first draft. I like to talk about a first draft, which you then activate. And activation, it's part of the cascading or communication of it is part, explaining it is part, involving the people. So I think that on that level, on a high enough level of abstraction, it's always these three types of activities and spaces. And then it's a matter of how you kind of I think go about it and execute it. I'm just curious because what is your take on the following? Now, sometimes people say you should start with the vision because then you are clear and you're not kind of bogged down by the problems and the challenges. Or others say, well, and I actually prefer, let's start more with the problems and the challenges, and then afterwards we talk about, I call it ambition, but then we talk about the aspirations, because I find, especially in the process, that when you first do the vision and then you do the problems, this kind of takes the energy oftentimes out of people and it loses momentum. If you do it the other way around, then there is more energy and more momentum. If you go out with, here are the problems, here are the ambitions, now let's talk about how we get there. Yeah, just curious to hear what your take is on that.
My experience tells me start the process with where people are, and people are typically bogged down in problems. Yeah. They struggle with problems on a day-to-day basis. So that's where you should start. And even if it's just about unloading, like really downloading their problems onto a whiteboard, so that they see them in front of them, you kind of help them clear their minds before they can think about the future. So in my process, we always talk about changes and challenges of the past 2 years. So that's what people still have front and center. And that's easy for them. Also for an executive team, they've all lived through that. They can all contribute to it. The moment you shift the narrative and the conversation then from the challenges that we had or that we've been having to the challenges that we need to answer in the future, that's the moment when you move from I know what it looks like because I'm part of it to I rather shut my mouth because I don't want to say something stupid, because no one has a crystal ball. We can't look into the future. So the conversation about vision, about the future, caters to a certain type of personality. Those are the more extrovert people, those that talk things through or think things through by talking them through. And the people that are more the thinkers, that need more quiet time, they often shut down. So that's the reason I created the process that I created, to make the results independent of the personality types that I have in the organization. Because everyone is sort of an introvert and an extrovert at the same time. You've probably heard the ambivert term. And we need to make sure that everyone who's in the room is able to contribute to that conversation about the future. And that's where you start in the past and in the present, and then gradually move towards the future.
Yeah, I also think very often, so people, they are fighting daily with the problems in the business. They are not really open to think about where should we take it for the next 5 years, right? So it's really a matter of finding some answer, or at least getting it out, as you said. And then, as you said also before, once you start about talking about strategy, you talk about the vision, ambitions, some problems, they resolve themselves because they are no longer relevant. Right? You no longer need an answer for a specific market segment if you decide that in the future you're going to focus somewhere else.
Yeah.
So,
or you need both. And that's very often the reality that executives deal with. They have ambitions, they know where they want the business to be. Let's say they realize that on their own they are too small to generate the revenues and the profits that they need to reinvest into the business to stay relevant. That means there need to be inorganic growth opportunities along the way. We talk about M&A. And at the same time, that M&A window might be a 12-month, 24-month window. And at the same time, the business still needs to run. And it needs to run really, really well. So they are these kind of ambidextrous people in the executive team that need to run the business as usual, and they need to run M&A. And that's tearing their brains apart, because these things are so different. And it's very often the case that we kind of assign certain people in the executive to a deal team, and the other part is more focused on keeping the business stable and keeping the business running. So not everyone does this. Not everyone in the executive team does everything. It's really about dividing and conquer, and understanding how the future of the business, the successful future of the business, starts today. But at the same time, we still can't, shut the doors for the next 2 years until we've done the deal. Kind of.
Yeah. So I mean, what I like doing is this looking, and John Hagel calls this zooming out. So you zoom out into the future, you have your ambitions, but then you zoom back into today and you think about, so what do we need to do in the next 12 to 18 months as the first kind of step to move us towards that. Maybe so we're talking about where to start. And Alan made a comment about basically, what about industry analysis? So shouldn't we start always with an industry analysis for each granular industry we compete in? So I would say, well, industry analysis is part of understanding what is going on. So what is going on in the industry? What's going on with competitors? What's going on with new entrants, customers, suppliers? I mean, the 5 forces, everything. But it's just part of the picture.
It really depends on where you start, right? Sometimes the industry, the development of an entire industry, is triggering a strategy process because you realize the industry is moving into a direction that you're not prepared for. And then that becomes apparently a starting point to really understand what that is. What is it that the industry is shifting toward? And how are we currently, relatively to the industry, how are we positioned? And sometimes industries are not relevant at all, because you cater to a niche that is not in an industry. I work with a company right now, a New York-based Inc. 5000 business. They had the most hilarious conversation in the leadership team when I asked them which industry they're operating in. They couldn't define it. It was impossible for them to define it, because there are literally like 3 companies in the whole world that do what they do. And it is undefined. We have been creating a strategy for this organization that doesn't even mention an industry, which is super interesting. I've never had that before. But that's when we talk about trailblazing organizations. We sometimes shape and carve something out of nothing that hasn't been there before. So industry analysis don't play a significant role in that context. However, that's not the case. That's not the usual case. Absolute exception. Most of the time, industry analysis and these things come into play once we've understood where we need to play in the future. So when we know where we want to be, we then need to define the path toward that vision. And that's when we often do things like industry analysis. And by the way, that's what we talked about earlier, Mark. That's what we often outsource. We don't even do that ourselves. We bring experts in, industry experts, that tell us about that. That's when we typically hire a consultant to come in for a day, run a workshop with us around, I don't know, the banking industry of the future, or how does the industrial manufacturing industry in the United States develop, or things like that.
But you also made a good point there, which is very valid. It's this idea, and that's something I hear also a lot from customers. This idea of you don't necessarily start the traditional way with doing all of these analyses, but you start working, you start drafting your strategy, and then when it becomes relevant to learn more about a certain industry, only then will you do an industry analysis. And I think the industry is one example, but lots of other analyses is the same kind of thing. So going away from this, let's spend 6 months on analyzing everything, and then we might only need 10% of that once we move actually forward.
It just happened last week. I was working with a financial institution executive board, and we started a strategy process last week with them. And the first thing that the CEO asked, are we going to do a SWOT analysis? And I looked at him and I'm like, why do you ask that question? Because then I'm out of the door immediately. So this is just stuff that does not engage everyone. Like these analysis types of things, they require a very different mindset and skill set than what you often find in executive teams. Executive teams want to think about the future. That's what they get paid for, and that's what many CEOs especially are really passionate about. They are great at envisioning the future. They don't want to do the details around analysis and things like that. So this again comes down to the human beings in the room. And if you start a strategy process with paralysis through analysis, then you're not off to a good start.
No, I think it's also something that is changing. So I have clients coming to me, they say, Mark, we don't want to do the traditional approach anymore. We want to do something fresh, and they particularly like this idea of not having to spend months and months on analysis before doing anything. Great. So we're slowly coming to an end. So if you have any more questions, just please put them into the chat and the comments on LinkedIn. So Alex, we can also keep answering them afterwards once 100%. The thing is over and online. But just maybe a closing question from my side. So if you just had to give our listeners one tip on how to make good or make better strategy, what would it be?
I think the secret to create really great strategy is not to ask yourself, how do I respond to a market? How do I become better than my competitors? The secret to really good strategy is about understanding your own ambitions and what would really fire you up. Because in the end, that fire is needed to sustain the journey. So it's sort of the fuel that your organization has to reach that future vision. And that's very, very human. And again, coming to what we talked about in the first half of the conversation around the 9 elements and the legacy trident, it's really about understanding that fire that fuels you. Because if it's not a joyride, it's just painful. And we need to make sure that strategy is not painful. Otherwise, it's not getting done.
Cool. Yeah. I can relate to that. That resonates well. Yeah, this idea of creating positive energy, and then so that it becomes fun for everybody to be engaged in the process. Great, Alex. Thanks a lot. So I guess if people want to learn more, let's just put in the book again. They can go to brueckman.ca/books, where they learn more about the book. And I had the masterclass, shared that link also before. So if you want to work with Alex or learn more about it, then just reach out, I guess, through LinkedIn or the website. If you liked this format, we have a next one is coming up on this Wednesday, where I talk about better strategy execution and how to avoid the pitfalls of strategy execution. And we're also going to have more interviews or podcasts with people, with authors actually coming up. The next one is in November. I'm going to publish the date with Peter Combo about his book, The Emergent Approach to Strategy. So if you like that and you like to learn more about it, then stay tuned and look out for the comments on that. So with that said, Alex, thanks a lot. And thank you for participating today. I hope it was of value. If so, please leave a comment and share it with your colleagues. If not, then tell us what we could do better next time. With that said, take care. Bye.